Egypt until 640. The first non-African people came to Egypt, otherwise called the Hyksos, in 1675 BC. The Africans there were already in the 13th dynastic period. They had built every pyramid you saw there before. They had done the S-turn in the Nile. They built every one of the major temples that had already been built, including the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The first European to come there did not arrive until the Greeks arrived with Alexander II, the son of Philip of Macedonia.
Look, I'm a college graduate. I never heard all this stuff before.
Because they didn't intend to teach you that. They can't tell you that you're inferior and teach you that you taught Egypt, Europe. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. When you heard of Homer, the first European to have written anything, you couldn't miss that. They said that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that was not until 833 BC. The Africans had already, in 255,000 at the Tassili Mountain, they had the Sibyllian period, first, second, and third, the pre-dynastic period, all the way up. The Africans had produced men like this, Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and call him the god of medicine. The Greeks changed his name from Imhotep to Aesculapius. There he is. There he is.
Wait a minute.
Went to Egypt to school.
As a matter of fact, the Egyptians said Homer was Egyptian, not Greek.
That's right. It's only the Europeans said that. The Westerners now said that he was. But let us go back. Remember that Homer himself said in the Odyssey what? That the gods Zeus and Apollo, Europe's first gods, came from Ethiopia. Go read it. And I didn't write it. He wrote it. Thales, from Thales down to Socrates. And Socrates down to Aristotle, which they call the pre-Socratian philosophers and the post-Socratian philosophers. Each and every one, including Plato, who spent 15 years in Egypt receiving their education.
You're saying Plato was educated in Egypt?
15 years.
Ben, what do you have to say about the missionary position? I should say the practice of missionaries.
Well, I don't have anything good to say, so I could make it by that one statement. And I don't think anyone who knows their African history could compliment the missionaries. First thing is that the assumption is made by Europeans, Billy Graham and others, and I noticed that he's getting his lumps now, for having the courage to say that somebody has practiced Christianity, but I don't know what he meant by that either. But number one, Christianity started in Africa at a place called Alexandria with two people, Pantheus and Boetius. It spread across the North African continent. There were 7 patriarchs, equivalent to the word pope, 27 bishops before it arrived in Europe. The Bible, however, the Old Testament, or the Torah, as it is called, speaks of chosen people. A God made a world full of people and select a handful to be the special ones. The Quran and Islam equally. The jihads were brought. Although Ben Habib and Hadsat Kubadi Ben Rabed taught Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who was illiterate in his own language, the fundamentals of the religions that, the fundamentals upon which all three got their beginning, we were told, and still being told, that there is a holy land for us in Palestine or Jerusalem. There's a holy land for us in Bethlehem. There's a holy land for us in Mecca, but not a single piece of holy land in the 13.8 million square miles of African territory. I went and volunteered, went to Panama to a segregated army where I couldn't go on the bus with the American people, and in Panama I went to the Panamanians I could go among. I came to Newport News, Virginia in the service and couldn't go on the ferry. They had a line called the nigger officers and the white officers. That happened to me. And do you know it was a German soldier that I was guarding, officer, that asked me, nigger, he says, exact word he said to me, nigger officer, do you know that when this is over, I'm coming to America and be your boss? And then I started for the first time to get some sense, although I had been segregated in Panama and so forth, and I didn't even recognize I was being segregated in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I didn't even realize it. I thought that everything was, as they say, hunky-dory down there. But, you know, because of what he said.
Hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory.
H-U-N-K-Y.
That was
right.
the expression.
Right.
That means real good. And I was a perfect fool and didn't know it. I use the term Negro there.
All right. Let's move forward.
Now, with man coming out of this period, we see him going down the Nile, and the reason we're using the Nile as the example in that the oldest records of human behavior, where the man left his record, has been found in that specific area. Based upon anthropological and archaeological finding, there have been a very old period. For example, in Southern Africa, in Swaziland, there is a 43,000-year-old iron mine found there. So that would indicate, we're talking about 43,000 years, meaning that since we're dealing with historical record, it matches most of the things that we find along the line, and more specifically in Egypt, where we go back to the Sibyllian period. The Sibyllian, the first and second period in Egypt will be about 125,000 BC. Back to 300,000 BC. The second period would be 125,000 to 25,000. So in between here, that mine was being used, meaning then that the Africans in the southernmost tip of Africa, otherwise then called Monomotapa, the earliest name when the Europeans came, it was called that, were involved and engaged in iron mining at a time when it wasn't so done in Egypt, because the civilization or high cultures traveled down to Egypt from the central part of Africa.
Well, let us examine the facts, and these facts are available in artifacts as well as historical documents. If you go with me, travel with me along the Nile, you will have an excursion that will bring you into the facts. First of all, in order for you to read a book, you must understand writing, and primarily coming from an alphabet. When the Africans along the Nile were writing in what you call in Western terms hieroglyph, in the correct term Medu Neter. Medu Neter is what the Greek call hieroglyphs. And remind you again, there is no Greece until 833, when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Africans along the Nile had already in 10,000 BC, I refresh your mind about that, in 10,000 BC, the Africans made a calendar called the stellar calendar, based upon the movement of the stars and moons around this planet, the planet Earth. There was no Adam and Eve yet mentioned, because there was no Jew to start a book called the Old Testament or Holy Torah. Thus, no Genesis yet. The Africans at a place, if you went to Egypt tonight or tomorrow with me, you will arrive the next day, and I can take you to a place called Esna, the temple of Khnum at Esna. And in that temple on the wall, you would see God Khnum making man on his potter's wheel out of clay. The Jews copied that and presented it, and you believe that that was the first time man ever conceived of the concept of making man from clay. And you believe that the Jews had something to it. Not at all. The Jews copied it from the Africans when they allegedly were in Egypt. Let's go further. Those same Africans revised their calendar in 10,000 BC. In 4100 BC, instead of the stellar calendar, they started another calendar called the solar calendar, based upon the Earth in relationship to the sun. That calendar set the basis of the present calendar you use. It had 365 and 1/4 day, corrected each 7th year. There were 13 months to the year, 30 days for 12 months and 1 month of 5 days. The Ethiopian government still have the 12 month of 30 and the 1 month of 5 days. In Egypt, the farmers use the same 13-month calendar. Again, I must remind you, there isn't a single Jew in the world yet. Abraham the first isn't born. He isn't going to be born until the 13th dynastic period. And I know it's hard for you to conceive of a time when people had religions and there was no Christianity, there was no Judaism, and there was no Islam yet. You have been taught in your educational system that the Greeks, or a particular Greek by the name of Hippocrates, gave to the world medicine, and he's called the father of medicine. That shouldn't surprise you, because Betty Goodman is called the father of swing. Although he went to Lionel Hampton, Count Basie, and others to learn swing, he became the father of swing. Now, if you control the printing press, you could make yourself the father of anything. You could call yourself the father of the moon. You can write anything you want. The point is, let us prove it. We don't have Hippocrates until 333, before the Common Era. You may call it before the Christian era, or BC, as you may say. Hippocrates is shown coming to Egypt to receive his education in medicine and other things, and that was in 33 BC. Imhotep, an African by the name of Imhotep, whom the Greeks call Aesculapius, died 2058 years before the birth of Hippocrates. He was such a great physician that Hippocrates himself and other Greeks call him the god of medicine. Now, if an Imhotep was not only a physician, but he was the Grand Vizier, he was the man who built the first stone building in human history, the man who built the step pyramid, designed it, of course, and built it. He was a multi-genius. He is the man that also gives you the little quip, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Yet in your education, you are taught that Michelangelo was the first multi-genius. Michelangelo is only the 16th century of the Common Era. Imhotep lived more than 3,000 years before Michelangelo. It just goes to show you the type of education. The other day I was reading where Martin Luther King went to speak with Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi in India to study nonviolence, and that Gandhi was the first to project nonviolence. That's nonsense. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, living in South Africa, yes, he worked for the British Crown. He represented the British Crown while he lived in South Africa, left South Africa because he was forced to ride on a train with Africans. And he left and then went to India and suddenly became a nationalist. He was a racist. Now, we can get the facts or we don't deal with it. We're not talking about condom and all these kind of things. In 1555, before the Christian era, Queen Hatshepsut had already had her surgeons, her doctors, her chemists to provide her with a method to stop pregnancy. It is today called in museum the Ebers Papyrus, which is to be the composition of the shrub of acacia mixed with honey to create lactic acid, which was made into a suppository, placed into the vagina to trap the sperm. That became today called autogenal jelly, which you use in diaphragms. So forth. And then this man would establish the first school system around this.
it will start an organization which is today called Freemasonry, Odd Fellows, Elks, and things like that. Even the Greeks would copy from it, and all these so-called fraternities and fraternities came from there. The lodge of Delphi, Greece's first lodge, would come from the development which Imhotep caused to be, because the men, the Masons who worked there, created an organization with men in different degree to handle different aspects of the building of this, and thus started what we today call Freemasonry and so forth.
It's in the documents of the church, and it's in the writing of the church. And was it not Pope Melchizedek, the three African popes of the Roman Catholic Church, Melchizedek, Victor III, and the other one?
Galatius.
Pope
Galatius.
Galatius. We have them there. Now, these are church documents. But remember, when there came a time in 1506, after we lost power in Spain, the Africans ruled Spain from 711. We were calling ourselves Moors, M-A-U-E-R-S, then M-O-O-R-S. From 711 until 1485, 774 years, when we built and brought into Europe the university system, building the University of Salamanca, S-A-L-A-M-A-N-C-A in Spain, a copy of the University of Genève from ancient Ghana, which was equally a copy of the University of Sankore in Tombouctou, which the French later called Timbuktu. Now, look, if you want to read it, read Stanley Lane Poole's The Moors in Spain, written in 1887, or Alejandro Macaziza. Read his book in Spanish, The Moors in Spain, and said that even the bath was introduced by those Africans.
You said the bra was introduced by...
The bath was reintroduced because Rome had a bath before, but they stopped because of not understanding the Christian doctrine that the Europeans had embraced. They stopped for over 1,000 years from taking baths. As a matter of fact, I'd like to make mockery of the fact that the Queen Victoria of England boasting of herself being the cleanest woman in all of Europe, taking 1 bath per month.
And all of them shooting up the indigenous people. And I used to say, hey, there's a savage coming. Shoot them, Tarmix. And then with the African, I'd say, oh, look at them savage. Tarzan is coming. And I'm hoping for Tarzan. And Tarzan hollering, Ungawa. And one thing, I didn't know that Ungawa means doo-doo. Because every time Tarzan said Ungawa, and when I found out that Ungawa meant doo-doo, I said, Ungawa Tarzan. I used to have fun then. But